The restaurant became so quiet that even the sound of a spoon hitting a porcelain plate echoed across the room. Every customer turned toward table 7 as billionaire businessman Richard Hawthorne slammed his hand onto the white linen tablecloth, his expensive watch flashing beneath the golden chandeliers. His voice thundered through the five-star restaurant. "Are you too dumb to serve a simple dinner?" The young waitress standing before him didn't flinch. She simply lowered her eyes, held the serving tray with steady hands, and quietly whispered, "I'm sorry, sir." Laughter broke out among several wealthy guests. One businessman shook his head. Another customer pulled out his phone to record the humiliation. Richard smirked confidently, believing he had just embarrassed another inexperienced waitress. What he didn't know was that the quiet young woman standing in front of him spoke 9 languages fluently, held degrees from 2 world-renowned universities, and was only working as a waitress to fulfill a promise she had made to her dying father. Less than 10 minutes later, the entire restaurant would rise to its feet, not for the billionaire, but for the waitress he had just called too dumb. Richard Hawthorne was one of the richest men in the country. His technology empire stretched across continents, and magazines regularly listed him among the world's most influential billionaires. Success had given him everything money could buy: private jets, luxury yachts, exclusive mansions, and worldwide fame. Yet somewhere along the road to success, humility had quietly disappeared. He believed intelligence could be measured by expensive suits, prestigious job titles, and overflowing bank accounts. People who wore uniforms became invisible to him. Waiters, janitors, drivers, receptionists. He rarely looked them in the eyes. That evening, Richard had reserved the finest private dining room inside the city's most luxurious hotel. International investors from France, Germany, Japan, Italy, Brazil, China, Spain, and the United Arab Emirates had gathered to negotiate the largest business deal in his company's history. Every guest spoke a different language. Richard had confidently assured everyone that professional interpreters would arrive before the meeting began. But fate had different plans. Heavy storms delayed every interpreter traveling to the hotel. The meeting could not begin. Millions of dollars hung in uncertainty. Meanwhile, 26-year-old Emma Collins adjusted her black apron before beginning another evening shift. To most customers, Emma appeared to be an ordinary waitress. Few knew the remarkable truth. Years earlier, Emma had graduated at the top of her class in international linguistics. She earned scholarships to study in Europe and Asia. She became fluent in English, French, Spanish, German, Italian, Mandarin Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, and Portuguese. Professors predicted she would become one of the world's leading translators. Then tragedy struck. Her father was diagnosed with a terminal illness. His final wish was heartbreaking. Never let pride stop you from honest work. After his passing, Emma abandoned prestigious job offers to care for her younger siblings and repay overwhelming medical debts. Serving tables paid the bills. She never regretted it. Because dignity isn't determined by a job title. It is determined by character. As Emma approached Richard's table carrying dinner, one investor politely asked a complicated question in French. Richard misunderstood. He responded incorrectly. The investor looked confused. Another guest spoke in Japanese. Richard laughed awkwardly. "I'll wait for the interpreter." The meeting stalled. Frustration spread. At that exact moment, Emma quietly placed another plate on the table. Richard impatiently waved his hand. "Can't you see we're discussing important business?" Emma nodded respectfully. Then, almost instinctively, she answered the French investor. In perfect French. The table froze. The investor smiled with surprise. Another guest immediately spoke in German. Emma answered flawlessly. An Italian executive asked another question. Emma responded without hesitation. Then came Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Portuguese, Japanese, one after another. 9 different languages flowed effortlessly from the same waitress Richard had publicly called too dumb. The restaurant became completely silent. Customers stopped eating. Even chefs walked out of the kitchen. Every investor stared at Emma in amazement. Richard's confident smile slowly disappeared. One Japanese executive finally stood. He bowed respectfully toward Emma. "In 20 years of international business," he said, "I've rarely met someone with your level of linguistic excellence." Applause erupted throughout the restaurant. Richard couldn't believe what he had witnessed. Embarrassed beyond words, he quietly asked, "Why are you working as a waitress?" Emma smiled gently. "Because honest work is never beneath anyone." The answer struck Richard harder than any insult ever could. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. The meeting resumed. With Emma translating every conversation flawlessly, the billion-dollar agreement was completed successfully. The investors insisted that Emma remain at the table until the contracts were signed. When the meeting ended, every executive stood to thank her personally. Richard slowly walked toward Emma. The restaurant watched in complete silence. Instead of offering excuses, he lowered his head. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I judged your uniform instead of your ability." Emma smiled kindly. "My father always told me that people reveal their true education by how they treat those who serve them." Richard stood speechless. The sentence echoed through his heart. The following morning, headlines across the country celebrated the mysterious multilingual waitress who had saved an international business deal. But Emma never chased fame. She returned to work the very next evening, serving customers with the same quiet smile she always had. A week later, Richard returned to the restaurant, not as a billionaire, not as an important businessman, but simply as a grateful man. He offered Emma the position of Director of Global Communications at his company. She accepted, on one condition. "No employee," she said, "will ever be judged by their position instead of their character." Richard agreed immediately. Years later, that policy transformed the company into one of the most respected workplaces in the world. New employees learned Emma's story during orientation, not as a corporate legend, but as a reminder that greatness often wears an ordinary uniform. And every time Richard walked past the restaurant where his life had changed forever, he remembered the lesson no business school had ever taught him. The smartest person in the room isn't always the loudest or the richest. Sometimes, they're the one quietly carrying the tray. As the final guests left the restaurant that unforgettable night, they didn't remember the billionaire's wealth. They remembered the waitress's grace. Richard learned that true intelligence is never measured by a person's job, clothing, or social status, but by the humility and respect they show to others. Emma never let the insult harden her heart. Instead, she answered cruelty with excellence, proving that real greatness speaks for itself. Her extraordinary talent opened doors she never expected, while Richard's sincere apology marked the beginning of a better man. Their story spread around the world, inspiring millions to treat every person with dignity because anyone, regardless of their uniform, may possess remarkable gifts hidden beneath the surface. And so, the waitress once called too dumb to serve became the woman who changed a billionaire's life with nothing more than knowledge, kindness, and quiet confidence. Remember, never underestimate someone because of where they work today. Tomorrow, they may be the person who changes your life forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories of kindness, justice, and life-changing moments.